All right. All right, should I go ahead and start, John? Yes. I'm going to take that as a yes.
Yes, sorry, my mic was muted.
Take that as yes or stroke, not 2 times for yes. Okay. All right. So this is with me and my colleagues. This is kind of it's Casey and I have actually did a little bit with Jeff Snyder right before finals exams, and so I think we had good response. So we're kind of redoing this a little bit again. And then even Saren and I did something over winter breakout where we talked about our super fun experiences with Chegg in fall of 2019. And we thought, surely spring will be better days ahead. Looking forward to spring 2020, because it's got to be better than fall of 2019, right? Yeah, so that was funny. So it was not, spoiler alert. So I actually brought both of these things together and kind of talking about how going online and online completed activities are really out of class activities, bring up these opportunities for cheating enhanced by the internet. And there are things we can do in terms of design to try and minimize that. And there are some trade-offs with some of these choices, right? So really part of the issue is moving offline, that there's a lot of opportunities on the internet to facilitate academic dishonesty. This is not new to this semester. So anytime you had assignments, papers, anything they complete offline, this opportunity arises. It's just that with this past semester and everyone moving to finals and any exams had to be given online, this issue kind of compounds as well. And so there are things just as searchable repositories, but I think one of the most pernicious and the one that's troubled the economics department most is actually a specific resource and their ability to very quickly and frighteningly accurately in real time answer original questions for students. So we've had, this is not the only site, but Chegg seems to be the leader in offering real-time solving uploaded problems and questions. I think a membership limits them to 4 per month. So they have to, there's sometimes they collaborate or things like that. But the solving of uploaded problems and questions that happens really often within 30 minutes in a lot of the courses that I and my colleagues have been teaching. And quality varies, but sometimes it's actually very good. So this really becomes a problem then on an exam that's sort of a take-home or pushed out online in terms of students' ability, even if you write your own questions, their ability to find answers out there. So in general, I wanted to back up a little bit and talk about course policies and management now that we're actually thinking for the fall. You know, in the spring with our shift to online, you changed the syllabus a bit, but you kind of maybe were hamstrung by policies and stuff that were already in place. But now as we start fresh in fall of 2020, these are things we want to think about. And then online exam design can minimize the opportunity to use these resources and others to cheat. I don't know that it ever eliminates it, but there are certain choices out there to minimize. So as you get ready to think about fall and not even knowing how it's going to begin, end, or what might happen in the middle, we actually want some clear guidelines about academic dishonesty and consequences. So as you're sitting about your syllabus, in particularly, you're going to want some clear guidelines, and I'm going to expound on each of these here in the next 3 slides. That you'll be wanting to have set up a pattern or a plan to check for violations and enforce your policies, and proactively and reactively protect your intellectual property. So as you deploy things, questions, and things you've used before, check it first and make sure it's not floating out there. If it is floating out there, ask these sites to remove it. They have no right to profit off of questions and things that you've written. And then after the fact, you can check, and actually by checking before and after, you really know that within that semester or within the completion of that activity, someone who completed that activity uploaded your work, and then you can react accordingly. So let's start with these clear guidelines. So we have a college policy, and there's a required blurb from the faculty handbook that goes in your syllabus about intellectual integrity, and you link to the college policy. But I strongly recommend that you think about the activities in your course and add some interpretation that's specific. So what constitutes cheating in your course? And be as specific as you can. Be specific about punishments, and be solicitation actually of outside assistance. So and really this one is anything that didn't come, that's not general knowledge or hasn't come through through you needs to be cited. And so sometimes when things fall into ambiguous about, well, I didn't know I couldn't go to the site and just take this definition, citation requirements can be really important in enforcing that, because you can say, you didn't tell me where you got this from, right? You're acknowledging you got this from someone else, you didn't cite that source, or you didn't use quotations. And so you really want to be specific and repeat this within instructions for key assignments. So it's in your syllabus once, but if you have things in your directions too, to kind of remind them and to prime them about it, it can prevent things. And again, it makes enforcement easier. This is, I know this is kind of small, so it depends on your screen here, but I just really wanted to give you an example of, so here I talk about the kinds of academic penalties that could happen based on the offense. Okay? And then I'm specific about offenses, copying from other sources without quotations and citing your sources. Inappropriate collaboration. Okay? And so I talk about what it really means when collaboration is appropriate. Because sometimes students will come back and say, well, we work together. I'm like, well, you having word for word the same answer of a third-party site is not a reasonable definition of working together. So make it easier on yourself by really making this clear. I talk about Chegg, and I often call Chegg kind of the use of a ringer. And the idea of a ringer, particularly when you teach online, is you hire someone else to do your course, or you hire someone else to complete work. You're basically contracting it out. With Chegg.com, that's basically what they're doing. They do it for a flat fee, and they're contracting out work in their course. And then coming with Chegg is the actual uploading, not just using these other sites to get answers, but actually uploading the content to the site. Okay. So I have some of the basic language, but I also put in some very specific language as well. And I remind them that there's a central reporting through the dean, and that I will always do that. So then sort of a before and after, you always want to check questions before deploying assignments or exams. Afterwards, grading by question is really where often you start finding these similarities and often odd patterns. I know in the economics department, a couple of academic dishonesty charges this semester, they pop up because someone follows a solution that's technically correct mathematically, but completely different from anything that was taught in the class. So they actually use a solution method that's kind of odd or kind of old or out of fashion in terms of solving a problem. And that's often the red flag that you see that come up as well. And then I would always encourage you to follow through with the report to the dean. You'll hear this, I've never done this before, I was under so much stress, this isn't me, that's a big one, I won't do it again. I'd really appreciate it if we not report to the dean this time. But the whole purpose of dean reporting is to look for patterns of students that are particularly good at convincing their faculty not to report it. So, you really don't know essentially how often they've done this or whether there's prior records. This is just a sample again, and this is actually when John will put up this link of these slides, and they're open for anyone with the link. But this is another example of an email that got sent out when people had used Chegg on the site again. And here I specifically tell them it's a copyright violation, right? And you didn't do this. You basically outsourced this work. It doesn't, it's not a measurement of what you have learned or what you were able to do, and therefore not allowed. And then it's always important that you can't just say, I've caught you cheating, I'm gonna flunk you, I don't even wanna hear about it, right? That's against our policy. You do actually have to have a discussion with students about their understanding of what happened and why they may not think it's a violation and why you think it's a violation. Doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but you do have to hear students out. That's an important part of our policy. If you're conducting investigations, there are some tools out there. So again, I focus a lot on my experience with Chegg, but Chegg Honor Code, which is kind of funny name, but anyway, Chegg has this page called Chegg Honor Code, and they will actually cooperate with a letter from the Associate Dean on letterhead. I have a class template with permission to share, so I can actually have John upload that and link to that as well for people in class. So I basically have a template, and you can just insert your class and your name and the URLs of what's been uploaded. What do you get back? It takes about 4 days, and you get back the name and the email and a date time stamp of the uploading and the answers. And again, here in these investigations, I found out that these answers happen really quickly. Like there are answers out there that grab these questions and answer them pretty quickly as well. But you know, this has been, there's been situations in our department this semester where students respond in their discussion. I didn't upload anything to Chegg. I have never had that account. I don't know what you're talking about. And Chegg Honor Code returns their Oswego email as the uploader. So I'm not sure what they thought was going to happen, but that's what happened. The other thing I want to mention here is that in Blackboard, before you start grading, you can download a grading history spreadsheet that has the IP address for submission. And in this case, on my final this semester, I caught 2 people submitting from the same IP address that's not associated with the campus. So in other words, it was the IP address at a small city, small town in the Adirondack area, right? And so basically this IP address suggested that 2 people were working on it in the exact same household, and they didn't have the same address. So I did actually follow up with them and ask them about it. I mean, they had a story that was consistent with why they would have the same IP address, and they both did terrible. So that's pretty much where the investigation stopped. But that's another check, and it's another check too, because over these people say, well, I had to go home. Can I take this online? And you find out their IP address comes up and it's an IP address from our campus. So they didn't take it at home, right? And so those are kind of issues that come up with a really quick search of IP addresses. Understand that people taking things on campus or people who live together in a house in Oswego or an apartment in Syracuse, they will have the same IP address because they'll probably have the same router. So the same IP address starts raising questions. It's not a definitive proof of anything. And then whether it's before or after, all sites have DMCA forms. And you can download the Chegg form and kind of save it as a Google Doc is what I recommend. And then I filled it in. I have my name. So the only thing I have to fill in when I do these is my date and the new URLs of the questions that have showed up. Right. So you can, that turnaround's about 24 hours. So honestly, if a few days up to when you're going to deploy an assignment or a test that includes questions that you've written but used before, it's worth it to do this check and to get them off Chegg, so students will not have access to them. Then if they appear again too, you also know that the uploading happened recently as well. Like I said, Chegg is actually really responsive, and so this takedown happens fairly quickly. I would emphasize that these need to be questions you wrote. So the thornier issue is if you're using a lot of publisher content, you don't own that content, so you have no standing to file a DMCA request. So someone's using Pearson MyLab and all the questions are on there, you just don't have the standing to do that. So let's talk more about exam design. And so the question here is, you want to go back and do you need to use a high stakes exam? And that's, again, when we had to pivot very quickly, people weren't ready to develop alternative assessments. This summer, I guess it's an opportunity to think about it. And I think it's driven by a course, your discipline, your class size, about whether or not there are alternatives where you don't have to be worried about policing this so much. Personally, the high stakes part too, so you can potentially break up exams into a lot of different pieces, because the temptation to really get help is going to be a lot bigger when something's worth like 20% or more of a grade than if it's part of many small assignments. As you go forward to write an exam or some other assessment, you want to think about questions that emphasize process or referencing or even currency. So staging work, scaffolding, scaffolding papers is one of the big ways to sort of push back against paper mills and things like that. And you can actually do that with homework and exams to actually stage on work that was done the material prior to that exam. The reflection or peer critiques is another thing that a Chegg.com answer just isn't going to cover as well. Reference other things in your course. Make them actually explain something using a specific model that's used in my course. Again, and potentially the notation that's used in the materials you provide is another way to sort of emphasize and de-emphasize the benefit of going elsewhere. In a course that maybe has a discussion running, you could actually reference prior assignments or discussions. You can require them to answer a question and then they have to relate it to a classmate's discussion post from the week before. And again, that's something that Chegg is not going to be able to do. And current events. So the use of past question banks aren't going to be useful for current events. I mean, I think students don't ever want to see a COVID-19 example as long as they live, probably. You know, so maybe the next generation that's forgotten about COVID-19 might want an example. But there are a lot of examples within the past 5 years that I can use for economics, and or even within the past 2 years. And you're just less likely to get a good Chegg answer in real time. Instead of asking someone about describing the general risks that a bank faces in this operation, I can actually have a link to the FDIC quarterly report, the most recent quarterly report that assesses bank risks, right? And then I can actually have a pool of questions where different kinds of risks they pick, and they have to sort of summarize what they are and why this is a special risk to banks. So they're using the material from class, but they have to do it in currency with the real-time risk that's going on. And you're not going to find that in a bank online, because those reports come out quarterly and they're different. So let's get into the nitty gritty then of how to structure an exam and the options that we would have in our learning management system. So one thing I did for the first time this semester is I kind of borrowed from some behavioral economics literature that tells us that asking people to commit to honesty in their process increases the amount of people who are honest in their process, or in other words, decreases the likelihood that cheating is going to take place. So really kind of emphasizing. So before they actually started the test, I had what's called an adaptive release. So they had to complete a one-question test. It's a test in Blackboard that just affirmed this academic honesty pledge. They had to agree to this, and so that means they got 1 point, and that 1 point opened the exams. You don't have to make it worth anything. So you can make it worth 1 point and not actually put it in your final grade either. So you can set this up. You don't have to actually give them credit for taking this pledge, right? But you can actually set up a mechanism where they have to affirm this before they can begin the rest of an exam. So this next part, and our resident campus expert on this is Casey Raymond, who's going to jump in here in a minute. But the other idea is you want a test that's testing students on the same kind of topics and skills and knowledge that you want them to have, but they don't want to necessarily have the exact same question. So you want to calculate, you want to have questions drawn from a larger pool. For those of us in STEMier fields, calculated formula questions are another way to actually have questions that are asking them to do the same kinds of things, but are unique to students and minimize collaboration. So it's more difficult to actually collaborate on this. And I would say it's easier to pinpoint the uploaders. When you have calculated formula questions with unique number sets, then you actually know who uploaded it when it appears on a site as well. But let me go to the next slide. And Casey, would you like to talk more about this?
Yeah, Liz. So
I'm going to stop. You want me to? I'll stop my. Do you want to share your document?
yeah, I'll do a quick share here as well.
I'm going to stop my share.
So this is something I created a few years ago with the conversion to Blackboard and some frustration with writing numeric questions, and I've come to realize that it actually works a little broader than that even. In part from some things this semester. So this folder is the link to the documents that is in the presentation that Liz has. And this is open to anyone. This is the presentation I'm going to do later this afternoon, but there's a whole PDF document here taking you through steps of creating numeric questions. But there's some other formats that work as well in terms of multiple choice, and you can actually generate fill in the blank or multiple fill in the blank questions. And it can get quite complicated, but the advantage to this technique is once you have a question that you want to use, whether it's got numeric numbers in it or some kind of variability, you get it created in a spreadsheet. And then from that spreadsheet, you can basically copy and paste it to as many rows as you want. I'm just going to pull up this spreadsheet as one example, as an extreme example. But in this case, I've created, I don't know, 500 different versions of this set of data. And this set of data has actually got 50 data points in it. So this is a really, really large example and version of it, of doing this. But the nice thing is, once I have this component here, and this is a numeric question, I have the 500 versions of the question here, the answer, some tolerance. That can be uploaded directly into Blackboard as a pool. And what I've done in my courses, and I know Jeff and others have done similar things, is each type of question like this becomes its own pool in Blackboard. And so then within Blackboard, what we can do is just select that pool of questions as a question set when you're creating your test, and tell it you want to use one question from that pool, and basically every student's going to get a different version of that question. And if you've got 10 of those in your assignment or exam, and you've got 500 versions of each one, basically every student's going to get a unique exam, but all based on the same topics and the same questions. And so this is there, and it really does help minimize the students working together, or the students being able to upload it and get an immediate answer, or more so, that might still work, but they can not go look up the answer and just plug it in. It's going to have to work through. The other part of this, which I'm going to stop sharing my screen so Liz can put the presentation back up, is something that Jeff worked on in part for colleagues in chemistry this past semester. If you go ahead one page, Liz. Oh, I thought you had the copy and paste part. But he created, there's a JavaScript that you can put in your, oh, sorry, it was way ahead. That you can put in your assignment or your test in Blackboard, and it will prevent students from being able to copy and paste or print that assignment. As it says here, it doesn't stop them from doing screenshots and posting those. And you also have to be aware that it can create difficulty with some, if not all, screen readers. So if you have a student that needs a screen reader, that can be a problem as well. So just be aware of it, but it is there as a possibility to try and slow down the ability of students to sort of jump ahead and game your test. So if folks have more questions about how to upload these large pools of questions out of Blackboard, please let me know.
Thanks, Casey. So pooling and calculated questions give students different versions of a test that's really designed to test the same competencies. And then other settings are going to be done to limit collaboration. So one of these is timing. And I think this past round, timing is a difficult issue. There's a trade-off here. Timing definitely limits the use of Chegg and other sites. And because Chegg really turns around answers pretty quickly. Timing is problematic with unstable internet. The students potentially get kicked off or have a slow responding internet as well. So there are some solutions to that in the settings. One of the ways I handled it is I actually broke my final into several parts, and then each one was separately timed. So it wasn't a whole chunk being timed at 2 hours, but there were 3 different parts, 3 different kinds of questions on my final, and each part is when you opened it, that's when the timer started, right? So all 3 parts weren't bundled together. In Blackboard, as you look at settings for an exam, you do not want to use force submit, so you don't want it to submit it if they get kicked off. And you don't want to auto submit at time, because if a student has a slow internet and they're running 5 minutes over, you don't really want the whole test to be submitted over that. You want to allow them to finish, and there are access logs that show you when those are the problems that they're having issues submitting. So there are settings you want to be careful of if you use timing. And again, you're able to give certain students longer time if they're entitled to an extended time on exams as well. Teaching asynchronously online for over 20 years, I was kind of against timed exams philosophically, but I've moved around them just because I've had these kind of problems. And I feel like I have to do more timed activities, but try to structure them carefully. Another big collaboration and actually kind of anti-Chegg type tool is one question at a time, no backtracking, which is another option available on Blackboard. So if you randomize your questions, you actually give them one question at a time and don't allow them to go back and change their work. you've really eliminated a lot of real-time collaboration. Someone could, again, Chegg answers so quickly, someone could post a question on Chegg, start doing the rest of the test, and go back to it, right? So that's a problem. I mean, it's another problem if students have, you know, are on FaceTime with each other while taking an exam and basically trying to collaborate and help each other out, which is not something you want. And again, timing, if you're timing the exam and have it with this format, the ability to kind of do that carefully is really greatly diminished.
Elizabeth?
Yeah.
I've been told to do the no back, or it's been recommended that I do that to avoid dishonesty. But my concern is that, you know, sometimes students will see something later in the test that.
It does. This is a real issue. That gets to it makes the exam harder. And I got feedback for a couple students out of a class of 170 that were really unhappy about that structure, which means that more students felt that way, and just a subset emailed me. And so they actually recognized that it was sort of an anti-collaboration tool. So, I mean, these exam settings are about trade-offs for one thing. The other thing, if it makes the exam harder, one thing I had is I had a baseline of how they did on the midterm. So I knew the structure was making the exam harder. Even if I didn't consider the circumstances, I knew the structure made the exam harder. So I committed to my students that I would center the exam the exact same place as the midterm, which they did as a class. They did fairly well, fairly decently. And so I kind of gave them that idea that this makes it harder for everyone. So we'll see how the class does as a whole, and we will move the distribution. I will shift the distribution right upwards, you know, if I need to do so. Okay. So that allayed some concerns. But there's no doubt some students are more deliberative than others. And so this setting doesn't actually affect all students equally. So just adjusting the distribution is not particularly helpful as well.
Right.
But you can think about how you might order questions in an exam. You know, you don't have to necessarily randomize them. If you have a large enough pool, students won't have the same questions anyway. So if you wanted to order them in a way that it built over the period that you're testing, then the backtracking might be not as binding as a constraint on students as well as jumping around. And then test availability exceptions is how you would accommodate if you're going to time your test. If you're giving an exam, you want to make sure you select feedback options so that they can't see an exam until they're all graded, until they're all in. You know, kind of like you would do in class. If you're using multiple choice that's auto-graded, you want to hide that exam column so they can't immediately see their scores, because you can't block the score, you can only hide the column for auto-graded things. And that idea is, again, students wouldn't see the feedback in the whole exam and be able to share it in the window that the exam is being taken as well. And then print restrictions, we actually kind of talked a little bit about this as well. Proctoring software. So the future might be proctoring software. Oswego does not have an institution contract at this time. Given the kind of budget issues we're looking at right now, I don't see this as something that the college might be wanting to spend money on right now. And even if we just take the money issue aside, there are issues that have come up. I think historically, some of these proctoring software has been pretty gameable. Just a screen lock is gameable because you only need another device. Most of the up-to-date proctoring software now is using a variety of techniques. They don't just lock down the screen. So I think the gameability, I think there's always an arms race going on. Like there are ways that for the older proctoring software to get around certain things, like open a window in incognito mode first or things like that. With modern proctoring software, they've kind of gotten around that, but I suspect other things, I suspect it escalates. People figure out how to get around the proctor wall. Proctoring tries to clamp down on that and issues like that. Proctoring software claims that they're fully compatible with text readers, and I should just say in all fairness, I haven't actually evaluated in detail a lot of these products. I know Sarah saw a couple demos, so she could chime in if she'd like, but there has historically been problems with text readers and proctoring software and tests behind a proctor wall. So in the actual practice of using them, if you do a quick internet search, some accessibility offices have complained about this issue. So it's been historically a known issue. I think the one issue, regardless of how state-of-the-art it is the software requires processing. It might require hardware minimums, and it has bandwidth issues. And I had to kind of try and intercede and broker a solution for a student this semester whose whose faculty member was using a proctoring software, and her internet just hadn't been that great. She just didn't have strong bandwidth the whole semester. And so it was just not, it was telling her your internet's too unstable. We won't allow you to enter into this test. And she was having issues, and, finally, we were able to broker a solution where she took it outside the proctor wall. But you have to be concerned about that issue as well, because proctoring software is running, and so it's taxing other systems when it runs as well. Philosophically, people who are very against proctoring software, and even things like Turnitin, talk about the adversarial relationship it creates, that you already start then with the presumption that cheating is going to happen. I don't know if that's any different than the careful design that I'm talking about to try and prevent it. But those are kind of issues that have been raised. I don't know, Sarah, there have been concerns in the School of Business about the software choice?
So we, in the School of Business, we looked at 3 vendors this past semester. We are hoping that the plan was that come fall, we would use a proctoring service. Given the current circumstances and budgeting, we're not sure if that's going to happen. 2 of them, HonorLock and Proctorio, seemed like they had addressed the gameability. They were very specific about that. We didn't ask, and I'm glad I'm sitting in on this as well, about the accessibility issues. So I think that's something that we would absolutely have to round back with them on. And I know, so one of my courses was a part of the SUNY Online pilot. So because of my experience in the fall semester that Liz had mentioned, I was like, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to use it. And it was a live proctor. And I had in my MBA class, a couple of students that I knew very well, were excellent students, tell me that it was a very uncomfortable process for them. So I think as we're looking at different vendors, we are also looking at the various kind of tiering of options, not necessarily having a live proctor, but doing things that would shut down the screen, not let them copy and paste. So we're kind of still in discussions, and we've seen a couple that we really like, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, and I would actually say there's probably got to be a SUNY contract, because these vendors collect data. Students have to load things on their machines, and data is collected. So SUNY's pretty strict about knowing how data is collected and how it's being used. So when we've employed things like Starfish and Maxient and some of this other software that's collecting student data, SUNY lawyers have to vet a contract that they take very careful look at the privacy language. And I don't even know, whether it's the standard that we would hope they have or less or whatever. But I would say that, like any of the educational software we've been using on this campus, data is collected. We have to think about how it's being used as well.
This is me.
Yes. All right. You go.
So I think one of the things, again, I had this situation in the fall, which had to do with students using Chegg. I was just completely unaware of it until that point. And then on a test, got a number of critical thinking questions, which were paragraphs that all came back with almost the exact same wording. So I'm like, something's going on. Ended up having a bigger issue than I had anticipated in the fall. So over the winter, I'm like, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So I had very clear, and thanks to Liz, because I had heard that Liz had a similar problem. So she was basically my support system for figuring this stuff out, submitting the DMCA notices to Chegg, getting all the stuff taken down. But I had very clear language in my syllabus this semester. I made sure to go through and I Googled all of my homework and my exam questions to make sure that none of them were available on Chegg or any other sites. I had a new section in Blackboard in the welcome to my course saying, hey, I'm taking this very seriously. So start of the semester, I have 2 operations management classes, one at an undergraduate level and one at the MBA level. The very first homework assignment I went right after the first week to see if anybody had posted it, and sure enough, somebody had posted, and this is a low stakes homework assignment. Somebody had posted the questions to Chegg. And so I'm like, this was at the undergrad level again. So for me, what I did is I followed up to the class and, sent a pretty long and genuine email and said, I'm really upset by this. I made it very clear in the syllabus. I tried to address this. This is your education, right? If you post this to Chegg, what's the point of being in the class or in the program? And I also went on to say, here's what's going to happen next. I'm submitting a DMCA notice because these are questions that I wrote. So this is a copyright infringement, and they will be sending me the name and information of who uploaded these. And I'm going to follow exactly what I have stated in my syllabus. within 30 minutes of sending that email, I had 2 students email me and say it was me. So I had 2 students fess up, and which was good, and I was able to work with them and figure out an appropriate course of action. But I knew that it scared the daylights out of the rest of the class because it was this additional communication after it happened. So I almost put myself in this kind of unintended or accidental experiment because I didn't have that same email communication with my graduate class. So I was under the assumption too that it's probably not quite as bad at the MBA level, right? You're more mature, a lot of them are working professionals. And sure enough, doesn't it also happen in my MBA class towards the end of the semester? So I think the big lesson learned for me is that it's not enough to just put it in the syllabus and have a page on it in Blackboard. I mean, you have to, whether it's in the classroom or if you're teaching online, send an email and say, listen, I take this really seriously. Here's what I'm going to do. Chegg will respond. They will send me information regarding, the email address, the IP address for the uploader. And again, it goes back to, I think, the last slide you had, Liz, about this adversarial relationship. I think I didn't want to do that initially because I didn't want to just put the assumption out there that somebody's going to do this. But I do think that because Chegg is becoming such a prevalent issue, especially in online learning, that we do need to find another way to address it. And we need to just call it out at the beginning of the semester and let them know what we're going to do about it.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo Sarah, there's something known as the Streisand effect. So the dilemma is, do I tell them not to use Chegg and then have a whole group saying, hey, there's something called Chegg? So you didn't, but I came around to what Sarah did, is that you have to be really upfront, because what I found is the Chegg problem, basically stopped after the first instant. And when I really cracked down and finally emailed the whole class in the fall, it stopped because then they were on notice. And I knew they were on notice because they complained to some of the other econ faculty that Dr. Schmidt was all over Chegg. And they said that I was paying people to post the wrong answers, which was not true, but was delightful. One of the nicest compliments I've ever gotten. But yeah, so I think I would go with Sarah, is to go full on saying, I know these resources exist and I police them and I try to design around them.
And I've heard from a number of students, because I had to address this, and we've created a task force in the School of Business on intellectual integrity because it's become such a big problem. We have students on the task force, and all of them have told us that probably 95% of students are fully aware of Chegg and Course Hero and Study Blue and all of these resources. So I think it's becoming less of like, oh, some students know about it, but others don't. I'm pretty sure that the vast majority of our students know about these resources.
This is what's at least troublesome to me with respect to breaking down a high stakes exam into multiple ones, because now you have multiply the kind of work you have to do in checking for the answers there by the number of parts in which you have divided that exam. Because I was actually surprised to notice that they went ahead and used Chegg on low stakes assignments too. So that's very good to know.
Yeah, I was surprised about that as well.
I would say that ECO 200, 170 students before, the questions were new because this is the first time I gave the final online, but afterwards I checked every single essay calculation question in the pool and I didn't find a single one. So I don't know if my Riot Act about Chegg or the Academic Honesty Pledge or what had actually helped with that, but I was pleasantly surprised about that part, at least.
This is Casey. I'm just going to add one last thing I thought of during exam or test creation that I deployed this semester, because in the courses I was doing, there was definitely outside work that would need to get done to submit your answer in Blackboard. And if it's numeric, Blackboard grades it right or wrong, even if it's,
Right.
And so one of the things I did is the last question on each of my tests, and you could do this on each part of your test, was a file response question.
Right.
And I asked the students to, if they wanted to take photographs or scans of all of their work and put them together in one document and upload it. And so if they got something wrong, it gave me a mechanism to actually kind of review partial credit.
Right.
And so that's an option that you can give to students. And I think it also might help kind of ferret out where they're getting these answers from. Did they actually work it out if they uploaded something, or did they just get an answer and put it in?
Sarah, did you want to talk about department?
Yeah, so I think that the next piece for me, given kind of what I went through in the fall, and then realizing that even after I do some of these things, we still need to be vigilant about it, is that, and Liz was mentioning this too, is that students were complaining like, oh, Dr. Schmidt's the worst, right? She's really honest about this stuff. If we're not doing it as a team and there's just like a lone person in your department that's passionate about intellectual integrity, it's going to be really hard because it's not reinforced. It's not, we're not creating that culture of intellectual integrity that we need. So for me, one of the pieces that was really important, and our Dean PK has been so supportive in this, is in creating a task force in the School of Business, is that we all have to be on the same page. So I would strongly suggest that if this is something you've dealt with or something you're passionate about, is bring it up, bring it to department meetings, right? We actually had Liz come and talk at our faculty meeting in the fall semester. And that was awesome because she had shared the same conversation with all faculty, and everybody was blown away at just how prevalent this was. So I think the more we talk about it with faculty, the better, so that again, we're not in this alone. One of the things that we're doing, we've just voted on in the School of Business at our final faculty meeting, was that starting fall, we're going to require that all faculty have the same syllabus language that goes above and beyond what's required by the university. But as Liz had mentioned, she suggested the wording that says this is exactly what's going to happen if, academic dishonesty occurs. So we're all going to have the same language in the syllabus. We've also created an honor code. It's just for use in the School of Business, but I think that there is some conversation about doing this at a university level as well. But we are going to require, we're going to be rolling out a little quiz in Blackboard that's going to be in every course shell in the fall semester. And it's 10 questions. And students have to take it in order to move forward in the course. So it's the kind of that adaptive release that Liz had mentioned before. And they have to attest that say, yes, I have read through the honor code. So we're going to try it out and see what happens. But I think over the past year, we've come a long way in having this be something that just comes up every once in a while to having this be something that's a priority for all of our faculty. Anne?
And I think this is,
Yeah, I just want to ask Casey a question back, his file upload question. Was it part of you said it was part of the exam? Were you giving a timed exam or not a timed exam?
It was a timed exam. It was a 0-point question. It really was just to give them a mechanism to be able to upload work that if they got an automatically graded question wrong, I could go back and review it.
Oh, I understand the strategy. I was just going to share that one of my colleagues, John Zielinski, did it as a separate assignment outside the time period, scheduled right afterwards, maybe 15 minutes to get all your stuff together after you've completed the numerical part. That's, and he found that helped some people relax a little bit while they were doing the exam, and really separated the whole upload online process from doing the work. So just wanted to share that.
There.
yeah, I think that's a nice workaround too, if you don't want to just add questions as well to your exam.
Yep.
And there are, for multiple pages, there are a lot of good free scanning apps. So anyone with a smartphone can load a scanning app, and it takes the series of pictures, combines it into one file. So students only have to upload one file. They don't have to upload each picture separately as well. So I want to echo, I was really pleased that the School of Business was trying to get everyone on the same page, because I do think you don't want students to get into shopping around. So in Money and Banking, we talk about this regulatory shopping around that happens when banks charter in the state that's the most lenient, right? And so there's a reason a lot of places are incorporated in Delaware, by the way. That's not just a coincidence. And so the idea that you actually want to all be on the same page so people aren't shopping around for who polices it and who does not is really, and so I think we've had the same department discussion, really the same academic year, and we've really raised a lot of awareness about it and consistency in policy and able to share these strategies of prevention. And it's been very beneficial in economics. And it's something we had planned to have a reading before the whole COVID thing. We were going to actually plan to do a reading group. Mihai is in charge of our workshop, and he was going to put together Cheating Lessons is actually a Jim Lang book. And we were going to kind of go read it, you know, as a book project and talk about strategy and all that. And that just didn't happen. But I think it's still on the agenda when we're back in the fall to talk about as well. The other issue is textbook materials, right? Because I know there are, in business and in economics, some of us rely on a MyLab or a Connect package to give students a lot of practice. But those are almost all uploaded. We don't own them. And, you know, when your textbook reps come in and they want to sell you a package, you know, you can ask them about how aggressive they are at getting this stuff taken down. Because right now, I don't know that they are. They say, well, it kicks down, it pops right back up. And I'm like, I don't know, because I honestly think the solution to Chegg is actually if publishers push back legally as them being a conduit. I don't see universities taking on this kind of legal fight that publishers would be motivated to do it if you say, you know, why wouldn't I use a free package or something? Why wouldn't I use something more open source if the stuff you give me with your textbook is worthless for evaluation? You know?
Elizabeth, I used some pool questions for some practice quizzes that they could take, my students could take this past semester because we weren't in class and that sort of thing. And like they all got 100%.
Right.
Like, and they're impossible questions. They're not easy questions. So they're clearly just I mean, even when you give it to them to practice, they cheat on that. I mean, I wasn't even looking at whether they did it or not.
Right.
So.
Yeah. So that's, yeah, and that is an issue. And that's why I think sometimes that publisher content can be good to say, well, this is a practice exam, like the one I would give you, you know, the same kinds of questions, but you won't use those same questions. And so they can offer practice, but yeah, I mean, if you're going to use that textbook material, it should be very low stakes. It shouldn't be a big percentage weighting the grade because it's just, there's not a lot of control about that as well. I went in using Connect, I was able to, in Connect, you're able to actually go in and edit the questions. So they're the same kind of question, but they don't pop up as searchable in Chegg and other databases. But that's incredibly time consuming, and not everyone has the time to do that as well. And then it just links to some alternative assessments that I brought up earlier. So, you know, if you see the problem is more insurmountable, you can think about the kind of questions or the kind of ways you're assessing learning. There has been and will be continued to be some CELT workshops in the coming weeks about creating OER projects, creating online pedagogy projects, creating books, podcasts, videos, and using that to demonstrate that you meet learning objectives rather than just a test. And those, of course, would be much, much more difficult to try and manipulate with that. And again, I think the substitutability of these alternative assessments is often a function too of class size, almost more than anything else. That is all I have. So if there are any additional questions.
I actually do a lot of essays in my online class. I'm teaching an online class now, and I like the exam format, and I have short answers and an essay. And then when the whole quarantine thing happened, I did exams in assignments, and it made me realize, I wonder if there's a function in Blackboard where I can give an exam essay and check for plagiarism within the exam. Because part of the reason I was using the assignment function in Blackboard is because it can check for plagiarism. And
yeah, I don't think you can deploy safe assignment in a test. I think
right. And so what I did was I just created short answers and an essay as an assignment for them, which was open book. But then I checked for plagiarism so that I could know if people were, you know, collaborating or if they were getting stuff off the web or whatever. But it would be, I don't even know if Blackboard can ever have that kind of function, so I can have an essay as an exam and check for plagiarism. Because right now I have
constantly innovate, so maybe it'll come.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I'm just messing with you. They don't.
It just is it's a good backup. I mean, I hate checking for plagiarism because I just hate it, but at least it gives you some indication of what they're doing, and then you can follow up. Like if it's a small class, I usually follow up and say what's going on. So.
Another common tool, though, is there are paraphrasing tools online where you can take your answers from Chegg, plug it through, and it will reword it in ways that won't be caught.
Yep. But sometimes the freezing, like I specifically create lecture notes and readings that use very specific language that I want to see in the exams and the essays. So one of the things, even though it may not pop up as plagiarism, sometimes the weird language the students will use, and I thought, I never used that term in my lecture notes. I never talked about that. I don't know why you're using this kind of word. And so it may not pop up on Chegg or some other, website. You can't Google it, but it just is a red flag for me. Like, no, that's not something we talked about in class. Why are you using that weird term?
Yeah. I mean, the paraphraser tools, they often sound really weird. Like, no one talks like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I had the interest rate is rising, and then someone actually used a paraphrase tool and told me the yield is ascendant. Like, no, that's not how it works. And, but that's, it is, you Google the question, and then one of the first choices that pops up will often have a parallel structure to your paraphrase, with where the words that you use in financial markets are replaced with some really weird synonyms. And so, I've dealt with that as well.
In thinking about, essays and plagiarism, if people aren't aware of the plagiarism resource that Indiana University set up, I can share that link. We use that in our first year honors course, typically, just to address a little more broadly plagiarism in writing essays and so forth. So if folks are interested, I can share that link. Basically, it's a set of tutorials, and you can actually assign the plagiarism quiz to basically demonstrate students have actually done that material.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up. Ranjit had a question earlier in the chat too about how much lower when you use backtracking. And I would just say my final exam this semester, in very different circumstances, had a distribution identical to the prior final exam, which was low. It was lower than the midterm. And I've always found that the case, the cumulative final, they're just tired and they've kind of given up, and they just don't do as well as they did on the midterm. But I thought the distribution was identical. So I think there was it was clear, even though the exam was timed, but it was broken in pieces, because sometimes people having to sit and concentrate for 2 hours versus 1 hour and a half an hour and a half an hour in a broader window, is an advantage to most people. It's either neutral and advantage to allow people to kind of debrief and relax. The open notes nature that they could actually quickly have. They had formula handouts and things that they could have right handy and didn't have to know those coming in. So you balance that with the structure that made it harder, and I ended up in the same place. So I don't know that there's a lot of data about backtracking versus not allowing it, because you'd have to compare it to 2 online exams and not an in-class proctored versus an online exam. So.
I found very similar things to what you're pointing out, Liz. Distribution on the final from the fall versus now, it's roughly the same. Backtracking online versus the in-class. But again,
right. So
yeah,
I mean, it's 2 different. It's a different group. It's a different draw of students, which
right.
can vary widely. So that's tough. But I had to believe that some of the advantages of pushing out the exam online versus the way I structured it were kind of canceling each other out.
And
Yeah, I guess what I saw, not only did I see similar bimodal distributions that I've seen before, where the good students were going to manage to do it any way you offered it, and the weaker students were going to struggle. I guess it's a good thing the weaker students didn't even cheat. And so I had some people who really almost got left behind, and I was amazed on that. I'm sure there were cheaters in there that I didn't catch, but I did also get.
Catch the really good ones. Ones that are super strategic about, we don't know.
Yeah, but I also saw the same thing I've seen for several years now, some bimodal distribution of students.
Yeah, I think contributed to the bimodal nature too is a pass-fail policy, where a lot of students went in my final knowing they really only needed a D- because they already knew that they could take this for pass. Maybe they had decided, because maybe, if you're sitting in the C range and you already have over a 2.0 GPA, there's not a lot of incentive to take it for the grade. If you can take it pass-fail, you take it pass-fail. So, I mean, our incentive structure here was also a bit different going into the final exam. So I actually have, so I know John will post this slideshow, I think. I'll make sure he gets this link. But I also have a handout from Paul's template, complete with signature, with Paul's blessing to use for Chegg Honor Code. And I can also send, I guess I can also link to a Google Doc version of the Chegg DMCA notice, where you just fill in your name and just have to change the date and the URL questions. Because really I have it set up as a science now. I have a tab open in Google Docs, and I have that document open that I'm going through, and I got a Chegg tab open and I got a Blackboard tab open. You're searching, you find the questions, URL goes in the doc, finish it, download it as a PDF, and you send it. And, you know, probably once a week, I spend about a half an hour looking for these things. So.
I'll stop the recording.